The copper backsplash turned my stomach to ice before my brain caught up. I was adjusting my veil in the polished metal, 3 months of hand restoration work creating a perfect mirror, when I saw her reflection behind me. Brenda, my new mother-in-law, her manicured hand hovering over my champagne glass on the bar, something small and clear between her fingers. 3 drops fell in slow motion. Tap, tap, tap. My throat closed, not from fear, from the sudden sharp clarity of understanding. The metallic taste flooding my mouth wasn't panic, it was recognition. Every dismissed insult, every calculated exclusion, every engineered humiliation over 2 years had been leading here. To this moment, to a dangerous substance in champagne at my own wedding reception. She didn't see my eyes watching in the copper. She smoothed her dress and walked away toward a cluster of guests, her posture radiating satisfaction. My hands didn't shake as I reached out and switched our glasses. The crystal stems felt cool and solid, real. The simple physics of the exchange grounded me. Her glass now sat where mine had been, my untainted champagne in my hand. The wedding drama everyone would remember hadn't even started yet. My name is Rachel. I'm 31 and I'm a restoration architect. This is the story of how I learned that some structures need to collapse before you can build something stronger. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. Most brides would be hyperventilating in the bathroom right now, but I spend my days calculating load-bearing capacity and identifying structural weaknesses before buildings fall down. I recognize the signs of imminent failure, the hairline fractures that spread, the weight that accumulates silently until something snaps. Standing at that bar, I didn't feel afraid. I felt the way I do when I'm examining a compromised beam, calculating, methodical, waiting to see if it would hold or give way. I walked back to the head table, my heels creating a steady rhythm against the hardwood. My pulse registered at my wrists, elevated but controlled, 82 beats per minute. I'd checked worse structural integrity under better circumstances. I sat down next to Marcus, the man who spent his days performing pediatric heart surgery, but somehow couldn't diagnose the malignancy in his own family. He squeezed my hand under the table, his thumb tracing my ring. When he looked at me, his eyes held so much unguarded love that my chest ached. "Ah, you're glowing," he whispered. 10 feet away, his mother raised the glass I'd been meant to drink, the one now filled with whatever she'd dropped into it. Her eyes found mine across the reception hall, cold calculation wrapped in expensive makeup. She lifted the champagne in a silent toast, her mouth curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. That look said, checkmate. She thought she'd won. Thought I was just some blue-collar interloper who'd stumbled into her dynasty, a problem to be eliminated with money or chemistry. I raised my water glass in return. My hand remained steady. The water tasted sharp and clean, like clarity. I watched Brenda take a long sip of the tainted champagne. She was so confident in her cruelty, so certain of her control. For 2 years, she'd treated me like a squatter in her son's life, an infestation to be eradicated. But she'd forgotten something crucial about restoration architects. We know exactly where the weak points are, and we know exactly when a structure is about to fail. I set down my glass and smiled back at her. Then I waited. To understand why I didn't scream, why I didn't knock the glass from her hand or call for help, you need to understand the architecture of our conflict. This wasn't a sudden explosion. This was the final demolition phase of a 2-year campaign. The Harringtons are what people call old money, which mostly means their wealth is inherited, and they're terrified of anyone who actually earns their living. I met Brenda at the estate inspection. I was wearing work boots and a hard hat, covered in plaster dust from the ceiling medallions I'd been restoring. She looked at my hands like they carried disease. "Marcus," she said, not to me, "are you hiring contractors for the West Wing?" "Mom, this is Rachel, my girlfriend." Her expression didn't change. She just said, "Oh," like she'd stepped in something. The insults were never obvious. They were structural. Small compromises in the foundation designed to make me collapse over time. She'd forget to include me in family dinner invitations. She'd introduce me to their country club friends as Marcus's little project, ignoring my master's degree and architecture license. She'd ask me at holiday gatherings when I planned to settle down into something more feminine. But the real failure point came 6 months ago. I was sitting in her library, leather-bound books surrounding us like witnesses. She slid an envelope across her mahogany desk. Inside was a cashier's check for $150,000. "You're a lovely girl, Rachel," she said, her voice warm in that particularly cruel way. "But let's be practical. You build things with your hands. We acquire things with our names. You'll never be comfortable at this table, and I'm simply trying to spare you the inevitable embarrassment." I stared at the check. It represented more than my parents had made in 3 years combined. Then I slid it back across the desk. "I think you're underestimating the going rate for skilled labor, Brenda. I'm not for sale." That's when her eyes changed. That's when I stopped being a nuisance and became a threat. And threats, in Brenda's world, had to be neutralized. There's a concept in psychology called an extinction burst. I learned about it studying how materials respond to stress, but it applies perfectly to narcissists. When a child realizes screaming isn't working, they don't quiet down. They scream louder. They escalate to a frantic peak right before they finally give up. It's the last desperate explosion of energy to force the world back under their control. The week before the wedding was Brenda's extinction burst. On Tuesday, she called our florist, claiming the bride had died in a car accident and the order should be canceled. The florist, thank God, called me first to offer condolences on my apparent death. On Thursday, I found her alone in the bridal suite, examining my veil. When she left, there was a jagged tear through the antique lace. "It caught on my bracelet," she said, all concerned, "but I know the tensile strength of French lace. You have to want to rip it." I repaired the tear with gold thread, a technique I use in historic restoration. I didn't tell Marcus. If I did, she'd spin it. Call me paranoid. Say I was imagining things under wedding stress. She relied on her behavior being so extreme that rational people wouldn't believe it. So when I saw the vial at the reception, everything locked into place. This wasn't random hatred. This was the final detonation. She couldn't stop the wedding, so she decided to ruin it. She wanted me sick, humiliated, collapsing in front of 200 of the city's elite. She wanted to prove I was weak, messy, unworthy of the Harrington name. She wanted a disaster. I just decided to let her be the victim of her own design. Structural failure is rarely instantaneous. Before a building collapses, it groans, rivets pop, wood splinters. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. The reception hall erupted in applause as Marcus finished his speech. Charming, self-deprecating, perfect. He sat down and kissed my cheek, whispering that he was the luckiest man alive. Then the room went quiet. The tapping of a spoon against crystal cut through the noise like a warning bell. Brenda stood. She looked regal in her silver gown, the tainted champagne flute with its gold rim held high. The room waited. She smiled at the guests, then turned her gaze to me. It was a predator's smile. "Her marriage," she began, her voice projecting with practiced ease, "is about partnership. It's about knowing who you are and where you come from." A few of her friends at table 4 chuckled knowingly. "And most importantly, it's about trust. Knowing the person sitting beside you has your best interests at heart." She locked eyes with me on the word trust. I didn't blink. "To the happy couple," she said, raising the glass. She tipped it back. I watched the golden liquid disappear, watched her throat work as she swallowed. Once, twice. She drained it. For a moment, nothing happened. She set down the glass, looking triumphant, turned to my father and started discussing his golf game. 1 minute passed, then 2. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap, counting seconds like a metronome. At 2 minutes and 47 seconds, the groaning started. Brenda stopped mid-sentence. She blinked rapidly, her hand flying to her throat. Her face, usually a mask of foundation and composure, turned a violent shade of gray. She tried to stand, maybe to excuse herself, but her knees buckled. She grabbed the tablecloth, pulling an elaborate lily centerpiece down with her. Then the emetic did exactly what chemistry dictated. It wasn't polite. It was violent. Brenda became ill, a guttural, ugly sound that cut through the string quartet. Her body violently rejected the substance across the head table, over the silk runner, the china, the skirt of her custom gown. The smell hit instantly. The woman who'd spent 60 years cultivating untouchable perfection was now suffering on the floor in front of 200 witnesses. "Mom!" Marcus shouted, jumping up. "Mom!" She looked up at him, eyes unfocused, gasping. "I don't," she slurred. "I don't feel." She collapsed sideways into the mess she'd made. The room erupted into chaos. I stayed seated for 1 second longer, watching the ruin. It was ugly, it was tragic, and it was exactly what she'd ordered for me. In a crisis, most people panic. I stood up and took charge. I told the DJ to cut the music, directed the coordinator to clear a path. Marcus was on the floor checking her vitals, his surgeon training kicking in, shouting commands about pulse and airways and pupil dilation. The paramedics arrived in 4 minutes. They loaded Brenda onto the stretcher. She was barely conscious, moaning incoherently. As they lifted her, the beaded clutch that had been resting on her lap slid off and hit the floor. The clasp snapped open. Contents spilled across the hardwood. A lipstick, a compact mirror, and a small empty glass vial. Marcus saw it. He froze. But that wasn't the smoking gun. Next to the vial was a piece of heavy cream-colored stationery folded into a square. I reached down and picked it up. I knew what it was before I opened it. Brenda's handwriting. Elegant looping script. I walked over to Marcus. He was staring at the vial, his face pale. "Marcus," I said quietly, "read this." He looked at me, confused, then took the paper. I watched his eyes scan the words. "Ladies and gentlemen, I must apologize for this interruption. My new daughter-in-law has struggled for years with personal demons. We hoped wedding stress wouldn't trigger a relapse, but it seems the alcohol was too much. Please forgive the mess. We'll get her the help she needs." It was a speech, written before the reception started. She hadn't just planned to harm me, she'd planned the narrative of my destruction. She was going to take the microphone while I was suffering and frame my collapse as a drunken breakdown, destroying my reputation forever. I watched the change happen in Marcus's face. It's a rare thing to see a man become an orphan while his mother is still breathing. The concern vanished. The panic disappeared. His eyes went cold and clear. He looked at the note, then at the vial, then at the woman on the stretcher. He finally saw the architecture of the trap, realized the monster wasn't hiding under the bed. She was the one who'd tucked him in at night. He folded the note carefully and put it in his pocket. When he looked at the paramedic, his voice sounded like metal grinding against stone. "She didn't have a stroke. She ingested an emetic and possibly a sedative. Check her bag for additional substances and call the police." An hour later, we found ourselves at the hospital. The place smelled like antiseptic and shattered illusions. Brenda was stabilized in a private room, the drugs flushed from her system. But the legal toxicity was just beginning. The police waited in the hallway. Officer Nolan, a man who looked like he'd witnessed enough family disasters to fill a library, took my statement. I didn't need to be emotional. I just needed to be efficient. While the paramedics had been loading Brenda, I'd texted the venue manager. Because I'd restored the Harrington estate, I knew exactly where the security cameras were positioned. I had the footage in my inbox before the ambulance reached the hospital. I showed Officer Nolan the video. Timestamp 2:47 p.m. Brenda looks around, pulls the vial, drops the substance. High-definition proof of felony assault. Marcus walked out of his mother's room. He'd aged a decade since morning. He walked past me, past his father, who sat with his head in his hands, and went straight to the officer. "My mother is awake," Marcus said, his voice clinical. "She wants to make a statement." "Did she confess?" Officer Nolan asked. Marcus laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "No, she told me she did it to save me, said Rachel was a gold digger ruining the Harrington bloodline, said I'd thank her someday." I watched Marcus carefully. This was the moment. The cord was either going to snap or strangle us both. Brenda had played her final card, the mother knows best defense, banking on 30 years of guilt and obligation to make him drop the charges. Marcus reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out the cream-colored stationery. "Officer," he said, handing over the paper. "My mother didn't just assault my wife. She planned a character assassination. She wrote this before the reception started. This proves premeditation." "Marcus, don't," his father whispered. "She's your mother." Marcus turned to him. "No," he said quietly. "She's a criminal. And if you pay for her lawyer, you're complicit." He turned back to Officer Nolan. "I'm pressing charges, and I'm requesting an immediate restraining order for both myself and my wife." I watched him sign the statement. It was the most romantic thing I'd ever witnessed. He didn't just choose me, he amputated the limb that was killing us, cut her off with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. No tears, just the sound of pen on paper, finalizing the divorce between a son and his toxic origin. The legal battles eventually settled. Life moved forward. It's been 14 months since the wedding. Brenda is currently serving a 28-month sentence for aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. The toxicology report confirmed she'd used syrup of ipecac, an emetic she'd obtained by claiming her grandchild had swallowed something toxic. Her lawyer tried arguing diminished capacity, but the pre-written speech destroyed that defense. You can't claim temporary insanity when you drafted a press release about it 3 days in advance. Marcus's father chose to stand by Brenda. He paid for her legal defense and hasn't spoken to Marcus since the day charges were filed. Marcus grieved that loss too, but he says losing someone who would enable attempted assault was no loss at all. Marcus and I didn't move into the estate. We bought a fixer-upper across town. Good bones, but needs work. Like us. I'm sitting at our kitchen table working on a bowl I broke last week. It's a Japanese technique called kintsugi. You don't hide the cracks. You fill them with lacquer mixed with powdered gold. The philosophy is that the piece becomes more beautiful for having been broken. The fracture is where the strength lives. For a long time, I thought a perfect marriage meant no conflict, smooth surfaces and easy days. But Brenda taught me something valuable. She tried to shatter us, hammered at every stress point until we'd crumble. But she miscalculated the materials. When we sat in that hospital waiting room watching police lead her away in handcuffs, Marcus and I didn't fall apart. We fused. The trauma didn't leave a scar. It left a seam of gold. We trust each other with a depth most couples never reach because they're never tested. I know with absolute certainty he'll choose me, and he knows I'll see the threats he's blind to. I finish the bowl. The gold lines catch afternoon sun, shining brighter than the original ceramic ever did. It's imperfect, it's jagged, and it's unbreakable. If you believe toxic family members don't deserve a seat at your table, hit that like button and share this story. Tell me in the comments. What's the pettiest thing a relative has ever done at a wedding you attended? Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.